Okay, so today was really, really interesting. Putin declared that the official annexation of the territories from Ukraine, the four oblasts, and it seems like as if he just thinks, I've declared it, it's legal, you can't do anything about it now, as if Ukraine's just going to take their ball and go home. And I think he's in for a rude awakening. I'm going to interweave RT and Pravda articles with The Guardian and Radio Free Europe and other sources. And so rather than hold the Russian state media to the end, I normally do a segment on fun with Russian propaganda, but we're just going to intersperse it. So here we're going to start with Pravda. Putin signs an agreement incorporating the DPR, LPR, Kherson, and Zaporizhia regions. I want Kyiv authorities and the real masters in the West, that's Washington and then Europe, in their West to hear me so that everyone remembers this. The people living in Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia became citizens forever. Well, he would like that to be the case. He would like people not to challenge him on that anymore. But there's still a hot war, and you don't own much of the real estate in at least two of those oblasts. He called on the Kyiv authorities to immediately stop hostilities, the war that Kyiv unleashed back in 2014. Okay, so why on earth would they just stop fighting just because you've pretended to be legal? And the war that they unleashed was not the war that they unleashed. It was a war you unleashed when you decided that you were going to roll over the borders in 2014. The agreements will then be sent to the Constitutional Court. Now, there's this veneer of legality, right? He gave a speech, he signed the agreements. It's going to the Constitutional Court, and then it will be ratified by the upper and lower houses of the parliament. And then all residents of the above mentioned regions will become citizens of Russia as soon as the agreements come into force. And then they can be mobilized, but we're not talking about that just yet. Okay, let's look at RT. Putin calls on Ukraine to return to negotiations. Moscow is ready for talks with Kyiv, Russian President Vladimir Putin said on Friday. Now remember, the important thing about when you're watching Russian media is to understand this one simple point. Putin is speaking to a domestic audience. Here's his polls, and I talked about this extensively yesterday. Here's his polls, and his polls went up in 2014, and they went up in 2022 after the invasion, and they were starting to sag, and so he was quickly making sure that this was getting done. But if you understand the polling, then you understand why he's saying what he's saying, because this is for his domestic audience who's watching Russian media. Moscow is ready for talks with Kyiv. Now he can say, see, we got these four territories. I don't know where the defeated Nazis are exactly. He's not saying that. Shh. But he is saying, see, we have this prize and voila. Okay, Moscow is ready for talks with Kyiv. Russian President Putin said on Friday at the ceremony for signing the treaties and inclusion in Luhansk, Donetsk Peoples Republics, we call on the Kyiv regime to cease all hostilities. Yeah, they're gonna keep saying that. People have made their choice, a clear one. Putin has called Kyiv to respect their free choice to please, do you want to, or whether they just made it up or ballot stuffed or whatever. This is the only way for peace. No, it's not. And the decision will be made on the battlefield because your parchment barriers of the Budapest Memorandum, as well as this parchment barrier, are worthless. So it's going to be settled on the battlefield, and that's what's going to happen. Next, here's The Guardian. Putin annexes four regions of Ukraine in major escalation of the war. And I think that's right. It is a major escalation. Putin's now in a corner. He's doubled down, and he can't get away from this. He's either going to be successful or terribly defeated. That's what's going to happen. Vladimir Putin signed accession treaties formalizing Russia's illegal annexation in the four areas. He kicked off the ceremony with a lengthy, combative, angry speech in which the Russian leader issued nuclear threats promising to protect the newly annexed lands with all the forces meant. The nuclear thing was very subdued. It was not a big part of the speech. I watched the whole thing. In fact, if you want to watch the speech, here it is, response to Putin's September 30th speech. It's his speech and then my comments about it, and as I just stop periodically and talk to it. At a session of the United Nations Security Council, Russia vetoed, unsurprisingly, a resolution condemning the supposed annexation, while China, Gabon, India, and Brazil abstained. Like, come on, guys. You see all this and you still can't even get behind it. Okay. But the best article that I saw, or the best headline that I saw today, was this: Putin suffers most humiliating Ukraine defeat yet. Why? What's going on? He's just celebrating. He's having a great time at this big party. I mean, look at his jubilant face here, right? I mean, he's having a great time. What's going on? Thousands of Russian troops may be trapped after rapid-fire Ukrainian counterattack fought to encircle a key strategic city on the very day Putin claimed to be annexing it. And where do we find that? Well, I first saw this with Denis Davidov. By the way, if you want to watch somebody else who does Ukraine kind of videos, he does a what's on going on the ground daily. And make sure you look up the DENYS DAVYDOV. I'm going to play just a moment of this.
Different resource. Oops, Russian soldiers are encircled. Really, this small road over here was the only supply link for the Russian army in Lyman. So how many Russian soldiers have been encircled? Some say 1,500 and some say around 5,000. So far, it's hard to tell, my friends, but obviously we're gonna see figures in future.
Okay, so that's Dennis, and I saw that yesterday, and he's been talking about this for days, and I've been seeing this and hearing this in other resources, but this is a big coup. This is encircling an army of probably about 3,000, maybe more, maybe less, but if you bag that size of an army, that's going to be right up there with the counteroffensive as far as how awesome that was for Ukraine. Okay, next. This was a great headline in The Guardian. Putin's annexation speech was more angry taxi driver than head of state, and it really was. I expected it to be much more about why we're annexing and that, and he did talk about that briefly, but then he kind of ranted and raved about the West and how much he hates the West and how the West is bad and the West are colonizers. And he would say intermittently like these things that were like just this like mirror opposite. It was so ironic, like, and they would uh, colonize their neighbors. Aren't you colonizing your neighbor? So, okay, here we go. 8.5 years ago, Vladimir Putin announced the annexation of Crimea. He gathered elites of Russia and the Kremlin St. George Hall for another land grab ceremony, this time laying claim to 4 more Ukrainian regions, preceded by an angry, rambling speech that only briefly dwelled on Ukraine and the 4 regions. And he did cover it, but it was brief compared to most of the rest of the time. He talked a lot about the hypocrisy of Western politicians who call something white today and black tomorrow, denouncing the totalitarian despotism and apartheid of today's West. Whoa, and like he would say, he would literally call the West totalitarian, where they have free speech and you have 15 years locked in prison for holding up protest signs against the military. In fact, people have gone to jail for holding up a blank protest sign at a protest. Like, they didn't even say anything on it. So, and he's calling the West totalitarian. It really was this long, rambling speech. It's hard to even comprehend just how off focus it was. It was very strange. The Russian president, this is RT, talked about the historical injustices and defies the colonial West, and that's really what he spent his time on. It was more of a backlash against America speech, and again, this makes sense. And again, I showed this yesterday. Here is the Levada Center. It's independent polling, but it's pretty accurate. Uh, Putin's approval rating. When Putin's approval rate, watch this. When Putin's approval rating goes up, like when he's invading Ukraine, watch what happens to the disposition toward the West and the United States. This is negative view toward the United States and attitude toward the EU, negative and negative. Okay, so that's a big understanding of what's going on here. And so the RT article talking about the historical injustices of the colonial West, that's right. That's what he spent most of his time talking about, which is really odd. Again, this is all here, but I have the video, so watch the video. It's a easier thing. Just sit back. It'll make you simultaneously angry, his comments, and somebody wrote, man, it's like you were thinking my thoughts. I was saying the same thing. Yep, that's good. I mean, you should be saying the same thing if you were an informed citizen looking at what's going on here. Okay, and you can find that right here, response to Putin's September 30th speech. Okay, taking aim at the United States, Putin casts Ukraine war as an existential conflict for Russia. This is Radio Free Europe. The speech was expected to be about Ukraine. However, the bulk of President Putin's nationally televised address from the Kremlin's opulent St. George Hall was devoted to a vitriolic attack on the United States. But again, he's saying this to a domestic audience. Anytime you can attack the United States and, by extension, the West, Putin needs a foil, right? And that is Putin's foil. See, we're in this massive struggle. That's why we needed to mobilize, because it's all of NATO, it's all the West, it's America, the empire of lies, whatever. That's stacked against us, arrayed against us. He's trying to gin up some patriotism within Russia to mobilize his army. Okay, next, Ukraine formally applies for NATO membership. Ukraine has formally submitted its application to join the NATO allies or alliance. Volodymyr Zelensky has announced. I don't know that anything's going to go anywhere. In fact, ML Harden asked me about this. He said, minutes later, Ukraine applied for NATO membership, requesting an accelerated application. You, Prof, have more knowledge and understanding than I do. What do you suspect happens next? I just read the news here and read as many different sources and triangulate. So it's not like I have this somehow greater insight, but from what I understand, so when at the last NATO meeting, they rejected doing this softly, and they said, well, as soon as this war is over, we'll review your application. Let's focus on winning the war. That was the statement that they made to kind of cover that they're not going to do it. If I'm not mistaken, they have some kind of internal rule, like the EU did as well, that you can't actually join while you're somehow occupied. Like you're somehow unless the borders are secure or something like. So he could give up the 4 territories and then join NATO, and then everything else be protected. I don't think Zelensky's going to do that, but I don't think NATO will allow them in without having that sorted out already. So that's where we are with that. I just don't see it. I could be wrong. If I am, I'm on record now, but I don't see it. Okay, Ukraine invites NATO to join. This is Pravda saying the same thing. Ukraine's decision to bid fast-track NATO membership sounds like a direct invitation to the alliance to come into direct conflict with Russia. There is another interesting thing, though, in this. Ukraine will nationalize all Russian assets, Zelensky said. Now, I think that's a bad tactical move on Zelensky's part, because Russia actually controls a lot of territory that they can nationalize the other way around, and have done in many cases. I don't know that this helps tactically, but we'll see how this all plays out. Okay, next. Russia to take control of the entire Donetsk Peoples Republic. Good luck with that. Russia will occupy the territory of the Donetsk Peoples Republic within the boundaries in which the country was recognized. Well, it's not a country; it's a state. But they don't actually own a big chunk of Donetsk and Zaporizhia. It's still in Ukrainian hands. So what they said here was that the entire country of the Donetsk Peoples Republic within the 2014 borders is to be liberated. De jure, yes, it's the state Russia recognized within the 2014 border. De jure, I had to look it up because I always get de facto and de jure mixed up. According to rightful entitlement or claim. So yes, it's ours by right. No, it's not, because you lied and had people have a vote at gunpoint, which is illegal, and then you're trying to have the rest of the legal process work out based on that, and it's not going to work. Behind the shining pomp of the Red Square rally is Russia really in turmoil. Yeah, Russia's really in turmoil. They had this big concert last night, waving flags after Putin's speech, and it was a great thing, except it really isn't, because what's going on in the country is hundreds of thousands of men are leaving their home, hundreds of thousands more are fleeing for the borders. There are more Russians that have fled Russia now after the mobilization or partial mobilization was declared than have actually invaded Ukraine. Like, just get that idea in your head and you'll understand a bit about the stress that Russia's under. There is a final line here. Is everyone ready to follow Putin into heaven? Asked the founder of a political analysis firm. Putin is basically proposing to the world that if the West doesn't give us Ukraine, then there's going to be a nuclear war. Is the Russian elite to support Putin until the end of this bet? I have great doubts about that. I don't know. I mean, they seem to love him, but I was reading the faces yesterday as I was watching as I was watching his speech yesterday, and I'm like looking at the audience thinking like, I wonder what they're thinking. I wonder how all in they really are, or how much they know that this is a bunch of crap. I mean, maybe they're all duped, but a lot of them are educated guys that know it's not, the West isn't doing this thing, we're doing this thing, and I don't know. It was a very different scene to the one 8 years ago when Russia annexed Crimea and Putin rode a wave of political euphoria that buoyed his support and fractured his critics. The opposition never recovered. Yeah, what happened in 2014 was very different than what's happening now. In 2014, it was like just popular support all the way up. And the attitude toward, oh, sorry, this is the attitude toward the EU and America is opposite. 2014, he just rode this wave of support right up to the top and just stayed up there for quite some time. And he's going up, but as Ukraine turns it around, it's going to change. And so here's the thing, his leadership is highly dependent on this. Zelensky is the wild card he never counted on. So he thought that Zelensky was going to flee, roll over in a couple days, whatever it was. And as Ukraine makes more and more gains, he put all the chips in. He's either all in or all out, and that's what's going to happen to Putin. So that's where we are. Hey, one last thing. I want to hear from you. If you have a question, I will do my best to answer it. Just put it into the comments. And if you're interested in this, I have a whole back catalog here of videos. Here, Nikita Romeo commented that this episode is stellar. I've had some people that have said that they've gone all the way back through to day 85 when I first started shooting these videos. So I have a lot of material here for you. And sometimes people don't recognize just, the subtopics, or by day you can see what's going on. But please, please inform yourself about Ukraine so that you can answer the Russian propaganda lines and the trolls, and it's going to magnify over time. So thank you for being the kind of person that cares enough to watch this about Ukraine.